Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this really comforting expectation of precision, right?
Oh, absolutely.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to the screen and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, it's a binary system. Broken or not broken. You can point to the fracture, put a cast on it, and the roadmap to healing is just entirely visible.
Right. But then you step into the world of psychology, into the realm of our internal struggles, our anxiety, our past traumas. And suddenly, I mean, that x-ray machine is just producing static.
Just complete static.
Because knowing the exact name of the thing that's hurting you doesn't seem to automatically fix the machinery of how your mind actually processes that hurt.
Which is incredibly frustrating for anyone who's trying to navigate their own mental health. We want the mind to work like a broken bone or, a malfunctioning car engine. We want to find the broken part, label it, and replace it. But the mind just doesn't operate on that kind of mechanical logic.
And that frustration is exactly what we're tackling in today's deep dive. So I was digging through a stack of research, trying to figure out why we're all seemingly more self-aware than ever, yet still, so overwhelmed.
Right, the modern dilemma.
Exactly. And two sources jumped out that completely flipped the script on how we handle our internal static. One is a clinical paper detailing a framework called Mindfulness-Based Experiential Therapy, or MBET. And the other is this raw, anonymized transcript of a therapy session conducted entirely through text messages on WeChat.
The contrast between those two sources is honestly brilliant. I mean, you have this highly theoretical clinical framework paired with a very intimate cross-cultural application of those exact theories playing out in real time on a smartphone.
Okay, let's unpack this, because as I was reading through this material, I kept thinking about how we process our own daily lives. It's like holding a book pressed directly against your nose.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. You can't read the words or understand the story until you pull it back a bit. Today is all about finding that right distance.
Yeah, and for you listening right now, whether you are trying to mentally prep for an incredibly stressful meeting later today, or, you're just feeling generally overwhelmed by life's background noise, this framework actually shifts the goal line.
How so?
Well, the goal is no longer, how do I stop feeling this bad? It becomes, how am I organizing myself around this feeling?
Wow. Okay, so before we can fix how we handle our emotions, we have to understand why our current methods are failing us so spectacularly.
Right, and the MBET paper introduces this concept of observational restructuring.
Okay.
The core argument is that MBT isn't a symptom management tool. It's not designed to forcefully correct your negative thoughts. Instead, it's about altering the organizational conditions under which an experience is held.
Okay, wait. I'm going to have to stop you right there. Because altering the organizational conditions under which an experience is held sounds like a line from a corporate HR manual.
Fair enough. Yeah, it is a bit dense.
What does that actually mean in plain English? If I'm having a panic attack, what does my organizational condition look like?
Think about physical bracing. If I suddenly throw a baseball at your head, your organizational condition changes instantly, right?
Yeah, I duck.
Exactly. Your eyes squint, your shoulders hike up to your ears, your muscles tense. You organize your entire physical being around avoiding impact.
Makes sense.
Well, the mind does the exact same thing with psychological pain. When a bad memory or an anxious thought pops up, your mental structure tightens. You brace for impact. You try to push the thought away, or you frantically try to analyze it to neutralize it.
Right, you go into overdrive.
Yes. The condition of your mind is defensive, urgent, and compressed.
So observational restructuring is about changing that internal bracing rather than just trying to dodge the baseball.
Precisely. And this leads to a really fascinating critique of our modern psychological culture.
Oh, I love this part.
Because we live in an era that heavily rewards explanation over observation. We're incredibly skilled at narrating ourselves.
Oh, absolutely.
We have this massive vocabulary now, right? We categorize our attachment styles as avoidant or anxious. We diagnose our coping mechanisms. We casually talk about our nervous system dysregulation at dinner parties.
Yeah.
The clinical paper calls this performative insight.
Performative insight. Man, I read that phrase in the source and felt slightly attacked, to be honest.
I think we all did.
It is so true, though.
Yeah.
We think if we can just name the trauma or, perfectly articulate the trigger to our friends, we've essentially solved it. But the paper points out that despite all this sophisticated vocabulary, we remain observationally unstable.
Right. You can have an incredibly articulate, like PhD level intellectual grasp of your own psychology,
Yeah.
but the moment you actually get triggered by a text message or a slight from a coworker, the system still overloads.
Yes.
The intellectual understanding does absolutely nothing to stop the physiological panic.
Oh, wait. So knowing exactly why I'm anxious doesn't actually stop the anxiety? I have to push back on this because it feels completely counterintuitive.
Okay, how so?
Well, in almost every other area of our culture, information is power. Let's go back to the car engine analogy. If my car is making a terrible grinding noise, knowing that it's the alternator and not the transmission actually helps me fix it.
Right.
So why wouldn't knowing the root cause of my anxiety fix the anxiety?
Well, that is the exact trap we all fall into. And the MBET framework answers that with a concept called observational collapse.
Okay.
When your car is broken, you are a separate entity from the car. You're the observer standing outside of the distress.
Okay, yeah.
But when your mind is in distress, the observer and the distress are happening in the exact same space. Observational collapse occurs when the psychological system just gets entirely swallowed by the experience. You lose the space between you and the feeling.
Wow. Okay, so what is physically happening in the brain when we use all that therapy speak then? Like if I'm sitting there diagnosing my own childhood trauma, aren't I observing it?
Not necessarily. Often what you're doing is shifting the processing out of the emotional and somatic centers of the brain, where the raw feeling actually lives, and up into the prefrontal cortex, which is the logic and language center.
Oh, I see.
Intellectualizing becomes a very clever defense mechanism. You narrate the pain to avoid actually feeling the physical sensation of it in your body.
So it looks like self-awareness, but it's really just avoidance.
Exactly. It can look like emotional engulfment or panic, sure, but observational collapse can also look like speech acceleration, rigid certainty, or compulsive explanation.
So someone can be sitting on a therapist's couch or talking to their partner, explaining their pain with perfect, highly evolved vocabulary, but they are completely collapsed. They're basically using the jargon as a decoy.
Yes, they are talking about the feeling to avoid being in the feeling.
Wow.
The organization of their mind is still built around panic and defense, even if the words sound incredibly self-aware. ME proposes that the goal of psychological maturity isn't emotional sterilization. The goal isn't to never feel grief or fear again. The goal is flexibility. Can you hold the painful experience without your observational capacity collapsing?
Okay, so if overanalyzing and intellectualizing are just sneaky forms of collapse, then how should we observe our painful experiences? How do we actually observe our pain without getting sucked into it?
Well, the source material suggests the answer lies in the spatial relationship between us and our feelings, what they call the right psychological distance.
The Goldilocks zone of emotion.
Exactly. This is a core principle. If you have too little distance from your emotion, you get engulfed. You fuse with the feeling. You basically become the anxiety.
Right, you're just drowning in it.
Yeah. But if you have too much distance, you dissociate. You become emotionally disengaged, which leads right back to that defensive intellectualization we just talked about.
And the therapist in the WeChat transcript uses a brilliant metaphor for this. They tell the client to imagine a magnet and a nail.
I love this part.
Yeah. So if the nail gets too close to the magnet, it slams into it and gets stuck. It has no freedom of movement. But if you pull the nail too far away, completely outside the magnetic field, there's no connection at all. It feels nothing.
Right.
You have to place the nail just far enough away, facing the magnet, to feel the pull, but not get trapped by it.
It's such a perfect image.
It really is. It's like standing near a massive winter bonfire. If you get too close, you burn. Your coat catches fire. You stand 50 yards back in the dark, you freeze. You have to walk around and find that exact, specific radius where it just keeps you warm, where you can tolerate the heat without combusting.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, finding that exact radius requires a specific skill that the paper calls tracking.
Tracking what exactly? Like a heart rate monitor.
No, you're tracking your own internal organizational process moment to moment rather than the content of your thoughts.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, a traditional approach might try to track the narrative, like the what of the story you're telling yourself.
Yeah.
An MBT approach tracks the pacing and the how.
Okay, let's ground this for the listener. Let's walk through a concrete scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Say I'm checking my phone at 9 p.m. on a Friday, and I get an incredibly vague, passive-aggressive email from my boss that just says, "We need to talk first thing Monday morning."
Oh, the worst.
The absolute worst. Instantly, my stomach drops. Panic sets in. What does analytical overproduction look like in that moment versus tracking?
Okay, so if you fall into analytical overproduction, your prefrontal cortex kicks into overdrive to save you from that pit in your stomach.
Hmm.
You start building narratives. You think, my boss is projecting their insecurities onto me. They're creating a toxic work environment because they lack leadership skills. I'm going to get fired, which means I'll lose my
Oh,
apartment.
yeah, the full spiral.
Right. You're analyzing the content of the threat, generating a massive amount of intellectual output to try and prematurely resolve the uncertainty.
And while I'm doing all that, my heart is still pounding and I'm still terrified. Like, the logic isn't stopping the physical panic. So what does tracking look like in that exact same scenario?
Tracking steps back from the story of the boss and looks at the organization of your mind. You observe the pacing.
Yep.
You might notice, wow, the moment I read that email, a massive wave of heat hit my chest. My thoughts are suddenly racing at 100 miles an hour. I have this intense, urgent physical compulsion to reply immediately or to text a coworker to vent.
Interesting.
You are observing the urgency, the speed, the physical bracing. You aren't judging it and you aren't rushing to fix it. You're just tracking the how.
It's pulling the book back from my nose. Like,
Yeah.
I'm noticing that I'm squinting rather than trying to frantically translate the words on the page.
Exactly. Because if you try to forcefully neutralize that panic, if you yell at yourself to calm down or try to debate the logic of the email, your psychological struggle actually intensifies the suffering. You contract further.
Right. Direct analytical confrontation usually just makes our internal defenses flare up even higher,
Exactly.
which provides the perfect logical bridge to our second source.
Yeah.
Knowing you need the right distance is one thing, but how do you actually achieve it? Because if telling someone to just step back and objectively observe when they're triggered doesn't work because their brain's guard dog just barks louder,
Right.
how do you actually bypass the intellect?
Right.
You have to give the brain a task it doesn't recognize as therapy. Enter the power of metaphor.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what happened with the WeChat transcript.
Yeah, this case study is just a masterful illustration of bypassing the prefrontal cortex.
Let's set the background for this client.
Yeah.
We have a 23-year-old Chinese grad student. She's highly intelligent under immense academic pressure and carrying a deep, unresolved childhood trauma. Her grandfather, who was the only safe, warm presence in her early life, passed away when she was just 6 years old.
And after that loss, she was left entirely in the care of a volatile, punishing grandmother and a father who subjected her to severe public shaming. Ugh, that's awful.
Yeah. To survive an environment that emotionally hostile, she did what many children do. She switched off her feeling register. She numbed herself to endure.
And that survival mechanism worked for a while. I mean, it allowed her to achieve. But eventually, it isolated her. She became known to her friends as cold and unfeeling.
Right.
If a friend came to her crying about a breakup, she couldn't empathize. She would just analytically dissect the relationship and offer a logical solution before the friend could even finish expressing their pain.
Which is classic observational collapse.
Exactly. She wrote to this therapist on WeChat, recognizing this flaw, wanting to change, but she was entirely trapped in her own analytical overproduction.
And if the therapist had asked her, how did your grandmother's abuse make you feel, she would have produced a brilliant, theoretically flawless essay on intergenerational trauma.
Oh, totally.
She would have used all the right words and absolutely nothing inside her body would have shifted. The intellectual guard dog would have intercepted the question. Here's where it gets really interesting. The therapist doesn't ask her to psychoanalyze her trauma. Instead, over a text message, they give her a surprisingly simple, pressure-free prompt. They say, imagine the events of your life are ingredients in your kitchen. Make a dish out of them. Don't judge or overthink. Work with what you have.
It is a stunning intervention. By asking her to cook a mental meal, the therapist sneaks right past her intellectual defenses. There's no psychological jargon to hide behind.
Right, there's no right answer.
Exactly. There's no demand for a clinical breakthrough. It immediately alters the organizational field from defensive compression to creative exploration.
So what happens when the analytical brain is forced to step aside and let symbols do the heavy lifting? Her response is incredible. She takes some time, and when she writes back, you can see the observational restructuring happening in the text.
Yeah, you really can.
She drops her usual clinically fluent rapid-fire voice. She adopts a much quieter, deeper tone, and she starts listing the ingredients.
And the symbols she chooses map her internal world perfectly. First, she describes the sweetness. She says she would reach for honey or ripe fruit. That represents those first golden 6 years with her grandfather. was warm and nourishing.
But then come the bitter herbs and the vinegar. And the specific image she uses is haunting. She describes a jar of salt with the lid broken off, spilling everywhere.
Oh, wow.
Things that violently sting when they touch an open wound. This encapsulates her grandmother's threats, the father's shaming, the years spent crying in empty rooms.
And then she introduces perhaps the most profound symbol of all, the hollow powder.
The hollow powder really stuck with me. How does she describe it again?
So she describes reaching for an ingredient that looks like substantial flour, like it should provide sustenance. But the moment you pinch it between your fingers, it just crumbles into dust and vanishes.
God, that's heavy.
Yeah. She identifies this as the neglect, the malnutrition of the soul, the feeling of being entirely forgotten.
Think about how powerful that mechanism is. How do you clinically describe the devastating experience of a parent who physically provides for you, whose care looks substantial from the outside, but evaporates the moment you actually need emotional support?
You really can't. Clinical jargon falls flat.
Exactly. But hollow powder captures the exact somatic reality of that betrayal.
Because symbols can capture the complex, contradictory reality of a feeling far better than a diagnostic label ever could. So she has these ingredients laid out on her mental counter. The honey, the broken salt jar, the hollow powder, and this leads to her breakthrough. She realizes a fundamental rule of the kitchen. She can't just throw the ingredients away.
Right. She admits she tried for years to pretend the bitter ingredients weren't there or to squeak them into the trash, but the effort of hiding them is what caused her emotional collapse.
Which forces the ultimate question, right? If you can't throw the bitter ingredients of your life away, what do you do with them? You have to reorganize your relationship to them.
And she chooses to make congee. Now, for anyone who might not know, congee is a traditional Chinese comfort food. It's a rice porridge that requires very slow cooking on low heat. She tells the therapist, you can't rush it. The bitterness doesn't disappear, but it gets absorbed into something warm and manageable. She even mentions adding back a tiny drop of that early honey, not to mask the bitter taste, but to remind herself that the sweetness existed once.
This is what an organizational shift looks like in practice. She isn't talking about symptom management or cognitive reframing. She moved away from the urgency to fix herself, away from emotional engulfment, and moved toward pacing and manageable contact.
Is this why MBT works so well cross-culturally? Because a bowl of slow-cooked congee or the sharp sting of vinegar in a cut, those don't require Western psychological jargon to understand.
Exactly. That is one of the emerging strengths of this approach. It bypasses cultural barriers because it relies on the body's native language, which is symbols, pacing, and relational safety. The client instinctively reached for a metaphor she knew in her bones. Congee is something a grandmother might make in a house that feels safe. She bypassed the Western clinical terms and found her own cultural symbol for slow, patient integration.
And she ends her message to the therapist with a line that honestly feels like a thesis statement for this entire deep dive. She writes, I don't think the dish is finished, it's still cooking.
The dish is still cooking. That is the ultimate expression of observational flexibility.
Yeah.
She's choosing process over premature closure. She isn't demanding that her trauma be neatly resolved by the end of the therapy session. She's allowing the ingredients to simmer on low heat. She has found the right distance from the bonfire.
So what does this all mean for us? We started out talking about how desperately we want to diagnose our pain. We want the clean x-ray showing exactly what's broken so we can apply a cast, fix it, and move on with our lives. But this deep dive, looking at both the clinical theory and this beautiful human interaction on WeChat, shows us that psychological maturity is a completely different landscape.
Yeah, the mind is not a machine to be debugged. Healing is not about emotional sterilization. It's not about achieving a state where you are perfectly happy and immune to bad memories.
Right.
It's about changing the conditions under which your experience is held. It's about building that observational flexibility. Can you sit with the messy, bitter, broken ingredients of your life without collapsing? Can you observe your own racing heart and panic without urgently trying to narrate it away?
It's about stepping back from the bonfire, just enough so your coat doesn't catch fire, but staying close enough to feel the warmth of your own life. It's pulling the book back from your face so you can finally read the story rather than just staring blindly at the ink.
And above all, it's giving yourself permission to let the process take time. The mind is an organic organizational system. When you give it the right distance and you stop forcing it into intellectual boxes, it has an incredible capacity to reorganize and heal itself.
Which brings us back to you. Listening to this right now, whether you're on your commute or sitting at your desk, we all have that internal kitchen. We all have a counter covered in ingredients we wish we had never been handed. So if your life right now is a dish that is still cooking, what is the one bitter ingredient you've been desperately trying to scrape into the trash? And how might the flavor of your daily life change if you finally stop fighting it, stop trying to diagnose it out of existence, and just let it simmer on low heat?